Can you beat Bonelab as a pacifist? This is a question that I think a lot of us in the Bonelab community have had, but going into this, I was only worried about 2 levels, and later I was worried about 3 because I remembered the other one. But Street Puncher and the Magma one were my main levels that I was worried about. The first few levels are extremely easy. I mean, you can mostly just run right through them. If you're fast and careful enough, you can just run right through them. Even if you die, sometimes you can trigger checkpoints and you'll respawn at that checkpoint instead. So you can mostly go through a handful of levels there without even touching an NPC, so much as killing one. Now, as for the crane bit, where you have to get all the orbs and put them there in place or whatever like that, those are also super easy, and you don't have to worry about them either because you don't interact with NPCs at all. In fact, all you can do is just enter each door, then exit right after, just so that the weird orange glowy ball thing can spawn in them and you can pick them up with the crane. But once we finally get to Street Puncher, that's where we start having issues. I was extremely worried about this because I knew I was going to have to kill NPCs to unlock the barriers and things like that. So getting creative, I just looked around for an alternate path. Now, the first thing I noticed was that the barrier at the beginning isn't all the way up to the skybox. So I was certain I would be able to find some way to climb over on top of that, barrier and get past it. I tried the obvious things, like grabbing onto the things that are closest to it, but I was too short. Now, obviously, if I was allowed to use any other avatar, this might be way easier, because I could just be the tall guy. But anyway, I next thought about having them trip over and die, because once I stopped trying to climb up that thing, I noticed that they tripped over a bunch, and sometimes it seemed like they would get hurt. So I assumed that would just take too long, so I kept trying to think of other methods. I tried to unload the NPCs, thinking that if they get unloaded, maybe the game would think they died or something like that, and the barrier would get dropped. If that worked, it would have been extremely easy, but it didn't. I tried carrying them all the way back to the beginning of the level, and it didn't work. Interestingly, however, I did discover that if you do this, they just respawn back to their original position. So if you ever want to mess around with that for something, go ahead and try that. So with all of this not working, I figured I should try other areas to climb up. I even tried carrying trash cans and things like that to try and get to the tallest point that I could, hoping that I could just get that little bit of extra reach to climb over that barrier. I went so far as adjusting my wingspan in the game to see if I would be able to reach further. Obviously that didn't work, and I also tried climbing onto my bed. Maybe if I climbed onto my bed or something like that, I could trick the game into thinking I was taller, but that just ended in me hitting the floor very hilariously. I wish I had footage of that, but I don't. At last, I figured out a path to get over that requires a lot of very complicated jumping. It also requires real-life jumping. But in the end, I did it. It actually wasn't that issue with enough practice. But the next issue was the next barrier, because there was no way to climb over it. There was no way to go underneath it. You couldn't go around it. I searched for every alternate path that I could. The only way to get through this was to kill the NPCs, because it was a tunnel. So I had to figure out some way to either make them trip and die, or trick the game into thinking they died. Finally, I realized that the turrets in that section could kill the NPCs, so I just tricked the NPCs into walking in front of it, and boom, that thing did the rest for me. It killed them for me. It was perfect. Now, unfortunately, in the next section, when I brought the turret over there, that turret got destroyed, so I tried the turret that spawns in the next section after that one, and of course, that one also ended up dying. So for the rest of that section, I just had to have them trip die, basically. I stood up on top of something and they just kept tripping over and over and over again until they finally died. Finally, we get into the hallway section, which is the last real difficult part of this run, I think, because it's another barrier. Basically, you can't use that jump pad for whatever reason until a handful of those NPCs are dead. I don't know why it's made this way, it just is. So what I did here was I tried to figure out why they weren't taking damage when they fell over in this section. I finally figured out why they weren't taking fall damage here is because they weren't tripping onto a weapon or tripping onto a corner or something like that. So I left the area to reset their spawns in that section, grabbed some weapons and threw them at the bottom of that hill, and waited for them to just continuously trip over onto those weapons and kill themselves. So finally, the hallway section was beat. I did that. I yeeted myself to the office and found out you actually have to kill the guy in the office to make the button spawn. I had no choice but to trip kill him, and that was it. The level was beaten, and I actually started to think this run might be possible. But it started to get more difficult. Obviously, we had stuff like the bridge and stuff like that, which NPCs don't spawn in, so they're super easy. I did them anyway just to make sure, but we finally get to the Magma one, where you have to defend that stupid little thing, and I was certain that this would be impossible. I had only one idea that I could try, and that was to try and stall them as much as possible, hoping that there was some kind of timer that would expire and then just auto-kill all of them. I couldn't stall them enough, however, and I failed multiple times. At last, I realized I could just pick up the NPCs without killing them, so I just picked them up and used them as human shields, essentially. And I held them in front of some of the skeletons that throw those huge explosions, those huge fireballs. I just held them in front of those guys, and they basically killed all of the NPCs for me. And I don't know if this counts as a pacifist move. Let me know in the comments if you think it counts, but I'm also still not sure if there is like an X amount of time that you have to wait for them to just end the level, or if you do have to kill X amount of enemies. So if you have to kill X amount of enemies or wait an X amount of time, let me know in the comments as well if that is the thing, because I have no idea. But after that, it was pretty much smooth sailing. We got through the moon level because there's no NPCs in that. Obviously, Monogon Motorway, that was super easy. And I mean, then we get into like the most difficult part, the worst part of this entire run. Magma was extremely easy. Street Puncher was extremely easy. I mean, sure, they were challenging because I had to come up with all kinds of creative solutions for that or whatever like that, but they were nothing compared to the worst of the worst, the hell of Pillar Climb. This level is usually pretty easy for me. I've never had issues with it. Apparently, a lot of other people had issues with it because they updated it to quote-unquote make it easier, but climbing up to the top is super easy, beating the level is super easy, but doing it as a pacifist is near impossible. My plan was to use the fire at turret things, you know, the ones that shoot fireballs at you. I was planning to use those to trick them into shooting the voids and that giant orb thing at the top. And surprisingly, it was pretty easy to trick it into hitting the voids and the orb thing like that. But for some reason, it did no damage, literally 0 damage to these enemies. And that became a huge waste of time. I ended up sitting there for way too long waiting for these things to die from this, but it just wasn't working. Eventually, my headset battery started to get low, so I hit the menu button to plug it into a charger so I wouldn't die while I was doing that. And when I came back to the game, all but one void was dead somehow. I have no idea what caused them all to die, but later when I restarted this level, because the same thing happened, whenever you hold the menu button, whenever you open the menu button and leave it, like leave the game basically, and come back to it, they just all die except one for some reason, and I don't know why that happens. If you guys know why that happens, let me know in the comments below. But of course, another way to deal with the voids is just holding a shield. For some reason, if they crash into that shield, 90% of the time it will kill them for some reason. I have no idea why. I thought the same thing would work with the big orb, so I kind of like maneuvered around and hoping that it would like running into it and whatever. And it kind of worked, but it only worked some of the time, and I don't know why. So the next best thing I could do was literally just set up the sword that spawns in this level, set it up somewhere, and have the orb just run into it while it ran away from me, because of course it runs away from you if you get close to it. I tried to corral it the best I could with the shield, of course, but it was so hard to make it run into the sword. And at one point, it even got stuck inside the orb. The sword got stuck inside of it, so I had to pull it out and set it up all over again. Also, almost every time it hit it, it knocked the sword down or moved it in such a way that it would be impossible to hit it again. So I had to annoyingly reset that sword every single time I did a little bit of damage to it, and it just took way too freaking long. Literally 2 hours, at least 2 hours to make it happen, but the orb finally died. Everything else after that was astronomically easy. The next big issue, however, comes with Ascent. Moving the ball keys into their spot while not killing enemies was actually pretty easy, but there's a section right after the balls where you run into these null bodies and they're blocking a door, and you have to actually kill all of them in order to unlock that door. I thought I could just run past them and just press the button and the door would open or whatever, but apparently you actually have to kill them. For some reason, the blue ones did not want to walk anywhere, so I couldn't trip kill these. I could trick them into killing each other, but I could not make them trip fall, which means since there's an odd amount of them, I would have to come up with some kind of creative solution to kill the third one. I figured that I could, maybe pick one of them up and carry them to the previous section where like the fire skeletons and stuff like that spawn with all the saws and everything there. I figured I could either trick it into like tripping onto one of the saws and die that way, or I could trick it, the skeleton into killing it and it would die that way, of course. And that worked. It actually died in that room. But upon returning to the room where those guys originally spawned, I figured out that I just hard locked myself out of this game. Like this, it was literally impossible to progress after this point. Because, and it's super weird, but as it turns out, if you take those enemies to the previous section and kill them there, the game doesn't tell the door that that NPC was killed. The game knows it died because it doesn't respawn at that section, which is what happens if they don't die and you go far enough away. They respawn, of course. So I had to actually redo that entire level, get all the way up to that point, and instead of taking that null body to the skeleton, I took the skeleton and brought them into the area with the null bodies and had them kill them for me. It was actually pretty easy. It worked like a charm, and we ran through the rest of the level absolutely no problem. Finally was the last level, Home, which was actually pretty easy. It was actually super easy. You can literally just run right past them and reach the end no problem, just like the first few levels. I don't think I even touched a single NPC in that run. But there you have it. After days of playing and thinking of creative solutions, it is indeed possible to beat all of Bonelab as a pacifist. Now, I was very surprised and proud of myself for this accomplishment. I expected it to be impossible, but I refused to believe that it was. Let me know what you all think about my pacifist run, if you think it's legit, if you have any other methods that would have made this an easier run, if you actually attempted this yourself and considered it impossible up at the street puncher level or whatever. And one more thing, I wanted to say thanks for all the support lately. I am very shocked, happy, and incredibly confused that I have grown to over 300 subs in such a short time. I have so many more videos and projects, and I would love for you to see them. So subscribe if you feel that I deserve it, and you want to be part of this community that we are growing together. So thank you, and have a wonderful day.